So welcome to the first of the afternoon sessions on the second day of this amazing recovery summit. And this afternoon, this panel that you've chosen to come in here is a good one. So I am simply the moderator. And you do have now, thanks to, I was told, when you need response, call recovery. Ben and Steve came and helped us with this. So you have a handout that these folks have prepared so that they can reduce the time in introductions, although most of them you have met at some point along the way. But I'll ask them to introduce themselves. You'll see a bit about their role in their individual disasters and the takeaways that they would like for you to go away with so that you have them in writing here. And we'll start with Mr. Eddy, Steve Eddy, and then we'll just work our way right down, and then we'll take questions. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Start with it. Gotta get closer. Is that better?
You got to turn it on.
That's better. Thank you. My name is Steve Beatty. I'm the city manager of Moore, Oklahoma. I've been the city manager for about close to 17 years now. Through all of our storms, we're talking about a marathon in terms of recovery. We've been sort of in a marathon for recovery in Moore since 1999 with three major storms, 99, 2003, and then 2013, the most recent. But it's a privilege to be here. We have a lot of great help in Moore. Obviously, everyone in all the disasters has volunteer help, has a lot of help. But there are some things maybe that people don't think about or don't remember or don't realize whenever they're going through a disaster and whenever they're even sometime after the disaster. You've got the takeaways here. I won't go too much over them in terms of word for word, but the first one, the sun will come up tomorrow or come out tomorrow. It's really true. It's unbelievable whenever you first experience a disaster, the feelings that you have, really of despair, of desolation, of fear, of fearing the unknown. You really don't know what's going to happen exactly, and whether or if or when the community will recover. But there really is, the sun does come up tomorrow. There will be recovery. There is hope for our community at least. These storms over the years have made our community stronger. I think have developed a greater sense or a better sense of community than we've ever had in our community before. We're a suburb of Oklahoma City, part of a larger metropolitan area, and fortunate in that regard to be that with regard to our recovery. But still, you wonder if your community can survive these things. Whenever you've got hundreds or thousands of homes that are destroyed, businesses, those sort of things. Many of you have been through it and know those feelings. But those feelings will be replaced with a sense of accomplishment. Whenever someone moves into that first house that's rebuilt, that's an accomplishment. Our third anniversary of our storm is actually today. We didn't choose to do anything and more on the third anniversary. I would imagine we might on the fifth anniversary. We're kind of the opinion that although we know our accomplishments, we don't necessarily celebrate those per se, but we just keep moving along and doing what we do. We did have a 1-year anniversary celebration, and it was very successful and very humbling. I mentioned this at the session yesterday, so it's kind of a repeat in terms of the second thing there. But municipal officials really can do some things to be prepared in terms of dealing with FEMA and dealing with just the menagerie of agencies, rules and regulations, those sorts of things whenever a presidential disaster is declared. Because there's a lot of things that begin to happen very quickly when the president signs a disaster declaration that if you're not prepared for it or don't really know what to expect or understand, it's very much overwhelming. We experienced this back in '99 with so many agencies coming to town, alphabet agencies that were using acronyms and we didn't know what they stood for, but they were here to help. And then contractors, consultants, everybody that shows up to town whenever one of these things happen. City officials, city managers, those sorts of people can at least be aware of processes and understand a little bit better how FEMA works. I think that'll get you a long way ahead of the game in terms of dealing with things like debris removal and contracts and how to deal with just all of that stuff that has to be done. I firmly believe that you've got to get the debris removed as soon as possible to begin to help your community heal and feel like somewhat of a sense of normalcy, rather than that debris just sitting around forever. But if you don't do that right, and go by the rules and by what FEMA needs you to do and what the local laws are and all of that, you could be in jeopardy in terms of reimbursement. So I just think that's important. You can have a pre-bid contract, any community can have a pre-bid contract for debris removal, which will get you way ahead of the game, and you don't have to talk to all those storm chasers that come to town, and we're here to help, and we can provide the best service that you can possibly have. Most of those, by the way, are problematic. We used local contractors that we had since we've had contracts with, and then they hire the subcontractors with the big equipment that have to come in. The final thing is staying calm. It's kind of easier said than done sometimes. The city manager, the mayor, the elected officials, the top leadership of any community, we're the people that people look towards to help through this disaster whenever we're questioning whether we can survive. They certainly are as well. But it's my job, it's officials' job to stay calm, to project an air of it, that you know what you're doing. Even if you don't, you've got to project that image out there, begin to make those decisions. There's been a lot of talk about decisions being made, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. More often than not, you'll make the right decision with a group of people, your department heads, your elected officials, whomever are involved with those processes, to make those decisions that need to be made. Special city council meetings, emergency city council meetings, all those sort of things that have to be done to get moving forward in terms of the immediate debris removal or immediate recovery, and then the long-term recovery. So I think that's it.
My name is Kimberly Diamond. I'm the village clerk treasurer. I'm sorry, I forgot. I'll be a good person now. My name is Kimberly Diamond. I'm the village clerk treasurer in Pilger, Nebraska. It is in northeast Nebraska. If you know where Lincoln is, it's about 2 hours straight up from Lincoln. Our village, before the tornado, was 352 people, so you know you can see the differences in a lot of different sizes here on the panel. As the village clerk treasurer, I wear 5,000 hats. I don't have a staff except for my 19¼ pound cat Panzer, and it makes you where you don't have a whole lot of people to turn to. As you can see on my first point, it's learn to accept assistance of any kind. I'm used to doing everything myself because it's just me. So when people start coming up to you and saying, what can I do, what can I do, what can I do? If there's anything remotely they can do to help you, let them do it. Let them file. I had a lady that was the PR person for one of the consulting firms that we've used in the past. She said, oh, please let me do something. And I heard somebody yesterday talk about a big stack of business cards they had gotten. When she went to the store, got a business card holder and alphabetized them. And that was just wonderful. And that's something I would have never had time for. You know, things like, the first few days, I don't, everybody was eating in the park, and I didn't go to the park. People would bring me food. I couldn't tell you if it was time to eat or not. Every time somebody brought me food, I ate it. So
It's not a bad plan.
no, it's not. Except I'm a stress eater. So, but I just relied on people to do. That seemed like simple things, but it was really good. They had a collection of, in the next town over, of necessities, toiletries and clothing and everything, and even though my husband was able to go over there, you don't want to send your husband to go find you some clothes, you don't know what he's going to bring you back. So they asked me what my sizes were, and a couple of the ladies, the older ladies that wanted something to do, they picked me out some clothes. And, that was a godsend, I wasn't walking around in my sleeveless shirt and khakis, capri khakis that I had on, at the time of the tornado anymore, so that was nice. But, even if it's something simple, or it's something big, or they can just, answer your phone if your phone's working, and, take messages for you. People want to help, and, it's good to take their help. The second one I got is remember that residences and businesses are dealing with what is like a death of their home or livelihood. It's just like a death of a person. Now, I'm not trying to say it's the same thing, but it is. It's a big loss. You lost your home that you maybe grew up in, or maybe your parents grew up in. You raised all your kids in there. You lost your home. And they're going to have issues that maybe not top of the list for you. They might be way down here, but they're going to come and tell you about them. And you've got to get a thick skin and get used to people yelling at you. The lady that lived next to the debris pile told me that she was having a nervous breakdown because the debris pile was there and wanted to know when it was going to move, and that was 2 days after the tornado. And, I was thinking, what can I do to help her? And there really wasn't anything. We were all thinking up suggestions on the side too, which was not really nice. We were saying we could board up her windows, we could, but that's away from her. We weren't telling her that. I was telling her I understood she had a big problem, and, and to her it was huge, but that pile wasn't going anywhere for a while until FEMA took a look at it, and we got bids and everything else. But I am proud to say that all the debris was gone by the end of the first year. So I was very happy about that. I got learn early who is the go-to person in your state emergency management and with FEMA. I had this system where I couldn't remember everybody's first and last name. So I had FEMA Joe. I had FEMA Kathy. Where's FEMA Kathy? She's back there in the corner. I had NEMA Kathy, NEMA Brent, DNR, which is the Department of Natural Resources, do not resuscitate. Mitch was a good help. And I learned their first names that way, and today even, and yeah, don't laugh at my phone, it is a flip phone, that's what the village pays for me. So in my contacts, it still says NEMA Mary, FEMA Kathy, FEMA Joe, everybody like that, so I could remember not only who they were, the first name, but what agency they were with. Now, that might seem really simple to a lot of people, that you might be able to remember that. When you have hundreds of people coming at you and you're the only point of contact, it's really hard to remember that. And somebody one day says, well, what's Joe's last name? Frick, I don't know, who cares? He's FEMA Joe. And so they all laughed about that, which was fine, but that was my way of doing it. And I've noted some more things on this sheet. Like the realities here, you are going to become overwhelmed. It doesn't matter if you have 50 on staff or if you're like me and it's me, but you're going to become overwhelmed. Your normal workload, it's not going to cease. I still had to deal with water, sewer, and trash issues. We still had places to mow. We still had all the bills to pay and everything else. So it's just your workload really gets a lot bigger, and you got to realize that too. It doesn't go away. Residents will expect that you have all the answers. Can anybody here explain FEMA? It was always a question. Well, when's FEMA going to come and give us money so I can rebuild my house? Not in this lifetime. So, but you can't tell them that either. So you just kind of explain to them that, we didn't get individual assistance and, and everything. When most of the visible destruction disappears, people will think your life and work is back to normal. Yeah, I do nothing now in my office. It'll be 2 years next month, but it's a lot of people's concept that I have nothing to do because there's nothing visible. It's, of course there's, empty lots and stuff, but there's nothing visible. You just learn to deal with it. And while most will be able to not constantly think or deal with a disaster, you'll be dealing with a disaster every day. That's where the sprint becomes a marathon. You're still dealing with the projects, the project worksheets, the tracking the payments, the making sure that when they come to audit you, which they've already come to do that this year, which was lovely, the federal OIG people will come and sit in your office, and then they will bother you by email for another 6 months. So if you hadn't had that yet, look forward to it. Lots of fun, lots of fun. But that's just a few things that I jotted down.
I'm Linda Langston, and I'm from Lynn County, and so to give you some context, you've heard Sandy Fowler before, and Cedar Rapids is the county seat for Lynn County. I will share with you a personal story that, so the floods for us, the big floods that are known, happened in June of 2008. But in June of 2002, I was actually running for the very first time for election. It was a primary in June. And the day after the primary, the headline read, "Wins election, loses house." The reason I lost my house was because of a flash flood. Our home was in neither the 100 or the 500-year floodplain, but our entire neighborhood was extremely affected. Beth Freeman at the time was on Senator Harkin's staff, and she was one of the first people. By the time I actually saw her, she didn't have a voice left that day. So that should have been my personal clue that resilience in the face of disaster was something that I was going to deal with more than I ever knew at the time. So fast forward 6 years later, and Lynn County had a flood, and I happened to be the chair of the Board of Supervisors. And so for us in Iowa, supervisors are what in many places are called county commissioners. And I think the challenging part that makes floods a little bit different than tornadoes, in tornadoes, as we've heard from this morning, you might have a half a day's worth of notice, but a lot of times you get a really ultimately short little bit of time to do something. But you have a pretty clear, with tornado sirens, you know what to do, and tornadoes go through. They are devastating, horrifying. Floods are a slow anticipation of knowing that it could be bad, it's going to be bad. Oh my God, we could never have imagined how bad it was. So for us, in the 150 years of recorded history in Lynn County, the highest flood we'd ever seen was about 22 feet, 12 feet is flood stage. I kept the NOAA predictions to this day. The last ones I have showed 26 feet. The floods ultimately went to 31.2 feet. So I used to take 6-foot gentlemen out on the levee that had been built in the 1960s that went to 22 feet, which would have protected us from previous high floods. And I also kept a 4-foot bamboo pole in my car for months. So when a 6-foot gentleman would stand on top of the levee, I would take that pole out and put it on top of his head and say, "That's where the water went." We're 8 years out. And so to the point of this particular subject, it is a marathon. And there were people in our community that went up to Grand Forks to talk to them within the first few days after the flood to talk about lessons learned. And they were very happy to want to pay it forward. And one of the things they cautioned us, of course, was that it would be a long time and pace yourself. Well, like most communities, folks go, "We're better than everybody else, and we're going to do a great job, and we're going to be on top of this." You know, after about 3 years, you start to get really tired. You think you're tired now, Kim? I'm betting you have no idea. So it is 8 years out, and so a couple of the things for me that call out, and I think you've heard it from other people. Self-care is really important. In a previous life, I used to be a psychotherapist in private practice. So people got very annoyed with me because I was frequently telling them things like, you need to go home now. You need to take some time off. Telling my fellow elected leaders, quit it. You need to find a way to recharge yourself. People fail to understand in a disaster that PTSD builds. We all suffer from it. Anybody who has been through a disaster, do not be delusional enough to think that you are not suffering from PTSD. When you see people die and you see people lose everything and you're the person in charge, that affects you very deeply in the core of your being. And without some assistance, you will pay a price. I know that one morning, you've seen the pictures on the screens. There was a theater that before I was elected, I was the fundraiser for the restoration of the Paramount Theater, and so I knew a lot about the theater organ in the Paramount Theater. And I woke up that morning, I wasn't sleeping very well, and I opened the newspaper, and here was the picture of this bedraggled Wurlitzer theater organ. And I just picked up a pillow and I put it over my mouth and I started to sob. My husband woke up because the bed was shaking. He was like, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I was, "Nothing." Ah. And I'm pointing at this thing, you know. And so those kinds of things rack up, so you have to figure out how you do that. Not getting enough sleep is endemic to disasters. You're tired, you go to bed, you can't fall asleep, and then when you do fall asleep, you wake up early and you start working. So recognize it and reach out to people. Understand your political reality. All of us ultimately are serving in political positions, whether we are, in some cases, elected, we might be appointed, but we are in political positions in this. Relationships are important, and use those relationships that are close at hand as well as those relationships that are at a distance. I had a really good friend who was a county executive in Newcastle County, Delaware, who happens now to be the senator from Delaware. And I called him. He said, "What can I do for you?" I said, "I just need you to listen." He was someone that I could call and I could say things that I could never say to anyone else. I could talk about the people I wanted to kill, and I could tell him just exactly how I wanted to do it. And Chris would listen, and he never told a soul. And so I think you have to recognize that that is a natural reaction after disasters, that you will not love everybody, and people will not love you. And so how you handle that, I think, is an important understanding. It does not always need to be with people who have been through the disaster with you. Sometimes it is important to reach out to resources beyond yourself. Understand your own abilities. Some people operate in a crisis better than others. And to some of the stuff you saw from Dr. Marcus this morning, you need to leverage your authority. I will give you a couple of examples. So we had a closed landfill that was very close to the city, and we needed to reopen it. It had settled enough, so we had enough airspace to open it, and otherwise we're going to have to go quite a distance. And DNR was pretty much responding with, "We'll look into that." So anybody who has dealt with debris removal knows that looking into it is not the answer you want to hear. So the governor was in town, and he's, you know, doing all the things that governors do, and he said, "Linda, is there anything I can do for you?" And I said, "Why? Funny you should ask. Yes, there is. Could you please help me take care of DNR? I need the landfill opened tomorrow." And he worked very effectively with us to make sure that that landfill got open very quickly, which allowed our debris removal to move much more quickly. But I will also tell you that sometimes it's not always as positive as that. So we had some folks in town who were very, very unhappy with our mayor, as is sometimes the case. And they were working in an unnecessary way, I believe, to figure out how to either get her to step down or how to get her out of office. Well, when you're recovering from a disaster, it's not terribly useful. So I went to the lieutenant governor and I said, "I would like you to speak to this individual who happens to sit on the Board of Regents, and he's due for reappointment. I would like it if you could suggest to him that if he continues along this path, he will not be reappointed. I need this to stop. It wasn't something that I think Sandy Fowler or myself, even as a county official, could have said to those business people without some degree of cost. But if you know who can help you get to the things that you want to do, it can really help you broaden your ability to get things done. And you have to recognize, and I think Jane is truly the master of this, that you do need a lot of help. So you have to learn to be a good judge of people. We had an emergency manager who really was not truly prepared for the scope of this emergency, which meant that I had to make some decisions about who would we bring in to help and assist. And sometimes I had to recognize that my judge of character wasn't good, so I had to politely go and say, oh, thank you for your help. It's been so wonderful. Could you leave now? You know, so you have to walk some really fine lines in your relationships to try to get that expanded team that you need. So thank you very much, and CJ, it's you.
Well, I can certainly reiterate everything that they've covered up to this point. And I'm not going to do that. I think for me, a couple of pieces that I encourage people when I go out and talk to them about the work of the leadership work that has to be done in the onset of a disaster. And there's nothing out there. And I tell people, and I mean this sincerely, I remember a point in time in the early hours of the disaster, literally Googling disaster recovery for dummies, because I had no clue what to do, and that book does not exist, so don't go out and look for it. But that part of it, I mean, obviously the first 2-3 days in particular, we running on adrenaline. You talk about no sleep. I think I can speak for just about everybody in the community. I know I myself went about 62 hours or so without any sleep in the first 2 or 3 days. So, getting back to that idea of taking care of yourself and so you can take care of others is really important. And when I talk to other communities that are developing disaster plans, I talk to them about that mental health component, making sure that they have a plan in place and how they're going to deal with that. The other piece too is how they're going to take care of one another, not just the people that they're taking care of, but how they're going to take care of themselves as leaders. And do you have a plan on how you're going to do that as well? Because it does take a lot of time. The other thing that I would share is that in reference to some of the other comments that were made related to the suddenness and the pain associated with disaster recovery in the initial stages, it is a grieving process, and there's no time. You don't have time to grieve. You have to stand up and you have to get back to work. And I think that's really, really hard on folks, and especially people in leadership positions that are trying to be sensitive and compassionate, but at the same time having to make huge decisions on a day-to-day basis for years, frankly. And sometimes I think people forget that just as you said, when things are cleaned up and it looks like the recovery effort's over, it's really just beginning, frankly. And so that's tough. I talk a lot about, when I talk to school superintendents in particular, about the importance of still having vision. You have a vision. We most all have strategic plans and things of that nature that we have on our shelves and that we work through. And when that happens, everything gets kind of tossed aside. So what do? Well, you have to kind of create a new vision at that point. You have to articulate that very clearly and give something for people to hang their hats on and to think about what the future could look like. So that they don't spend a lot of time dealing in the here and now, that there is hope for the future, and that there will be a better day ahead. We're just going to have to all work together to get past that. And so having a vision for what that might look like is important as well. I think for us, the most important thing we had in place prior to the disaster that really prepared us well was just the relationships we had in our community. We had a tremendous bonds with, at that point, we had about 300 formal partnerships with business, human service agencies, and faith community in our town, and great relationship with the city and the police department, and every facet of our community. We were pretty tightly knit even for a town this size, and so when we went to the emergency command center, we already knew each other. We knew kind of how everybody took their coffee and had a great relationship, and were able to leverage those relationships to get some things done quickly. So there wasn't any of this get to know you stuff. We weren't dating when we walked into the emergency command center. We were forced into a relationship. That relationship was already there, so that was really important for us. So I'll stop there, but I will say, number one, thanks for coming to Joplin, and two, thank you. I know I'm sure that there are many people in this room that either, if you did spend time here, you said some prayers for us, and I thank you for that. And keep those going for us as well as everybody at this table, and any of you that are going through disaster right now. Certainly understand how tough it is and appreciate the support.
Thank you so much. So there's a microphone in the middle here, and whatever questions you have, if you'll step up to the mic with those questions, that would be great. We've heard from 4 leaders who had unusual circumstances thrust upon them. Probably not what they envisioned when they first took the jobs, right? Yeah, I hope there's a disaster while I'm there. But they've given us perspectives about leadership and what leaders face, and kind of the realities of leadership in the midst of a crisis. Let's go to our first question.
Hi, I'm Jim Garrett from Kentucky Emergency Management. I'm going to direct the question towards the superintendent, but it could be broadened out. When you mentioned a strategic plan, it just gave me, the thought that you're right. So many of us have strategic plans sitting on the shelves, but we often say that disaster gives you that opportunity to do it over again and do it right this time, or maybe it gives us the opportunity to get the strategic plan out to say, okay, where were we in this? Now, how can the disaster gives us opportunity to do pieces of the strategic plan? So the question is, did you at what point in recovery in the marathon do we pull out strategic plans and say, let's make recovery fit what we already were planning to do?
It was ironic. We had actually finished up our long-range facilities planning and I think it was board approved in April before the May tornado. So one of the things that we had in our strategic plan was that we were planning on, which is going to take a number of years through the grant process, is to tap into the financial resources of SEMA to help build safe rooms each one of our schools. And that was already a part of our long-range strategic plan. We were also having conversations around how we could bring together Franklin Technology Center and Joplin High School. They were separated by about 200 yards so that we created an integrated technical high school for our high school students, and to better meet the needs of our local workforce. And so we were putting together, trying to visualize what that might look like. And so certainly after the tornado took down the high school and technical school, that gave us an opportunity to work through that as well. So there were a lot of pieces, both from a facilities planning standpoint and our strategic plan, that we certainly pulled off that shelf. And I would say the facilities plan was pulled off the shelf probably within a week or two, as we started to get a sense of where we were at and how we wanted to move forward. And we just started going through. Not everything was a perfect fit, but where we could do what needed to be done, we were able to make some things happen and move us forward strategically. And one of our early commitments was to build back better than we were before. We could have easily built back the high school. If you haven't seen it, it's an amazing facility, but we could have built back a high school that reflected a 1957 vision for teaching and learning. So we spent a lot of time, even leading up to the disaster, talking about what we wanted to create programmatically for our kids going forward. And that following year, in April, we had scheduled to run, based on the numbers we were crunching, a $57 million bond issue to build what we needed to build in order to meet that need. Well, we went ahead and did that anyway for different reasons. We were able to accomplish more than what we had originally thought we could. And what you see in our community today are some really high quality facilities. Every school's got a safe room, safe place, community safe rooms throughout the community. And there isn't much left. That was a 15-year plan that we accomplished in about 4. So it was good to have had all those conversations on the front end. It was very helpful, I think, in our recovery effort.
Thank you.
I would just note as a follow-up, the adage, never waste a good crisis. So there is a reality that happens that all the rules and the things that you know go away after the crisis. It's like you have this, it's longer than a moment. Sandy and I have estimated that somewhere in the last 2 years, things have started to go back to concrete. But you have a whole different perspective, and how you meld that and react to the input you're getting is really critical. Because I think post-disaster of any kind, you really have to take advantage of, regardless of what that plan is, this is a new opportunity. I would use the example, well, there are two really. One is the library. So the library did get flooded, and there were a couple of different ways that they could go, and much like you noted about the schools, CJ, it was a little hard getting the community's mind around the fact that we were building a 21st century library. It didn't look like the old library. It didn't interact with people in the same way. And in the same way, there's a park actually today, about an hour ago or 45 minutes ago, is doing a dedication. So you might think, well, a park, no big deal. Well, the city chose to cut down some trees in the park and redo the park. Yes, oh my. But it looks way better, I am telling you, it looks so much better. The county contributed a really large piece of public art. And so there's a lot of collaboration that went on, and I think you have to be aware that there are opportunities you can leverage. It's great to have a good plan, but you also have to recognize that out of disaster comes opportunity.
You have something?
Yeah, I just have a small comment. We were approached soon after the tornado by the Nebraska APA, the American Planning Association, and they are helping us to rewrite our comprehensive plan and zoning ordinances now. So we are changing and updating things now.
Thank you. I want to note that the responses we heard just now line up exactly with the title of the workshop. It's a sprint that becomes a marathon. You know, you train differently, right, for sprinting versus running marathons. When you start sprinting and you become a marathoner, it's a whole different business. And even in the comments you've made, Steve said 3 years ago today. It's still fresh. It's still what's happening today, not just talking about the response at the beginning. 45 minutes ago, a park opened, right? The various components, even of the discussions that have been held today, that demonstrate for us that leadership, the need for leadership, does not end. And the marathon piece of it are the continued items, the continued aspects, it's not just projects. It's the view as a whole that Linda mentioned where, well, 8 years ago this event happened, and in the last couple of years things are kind of beginning to become concrete again. That concept of leadership is different. It's exhausting, it's long-term, and it's part of the reason that it was included in this workshop today. We'll focus a little more on that. Dante, question please.
Dante Blanecki, City of Independence, Missouri, Emergency Management. So I've been asking some of the presenters and speakers this question, and I think your most pertinent comments just now kind of lead to this. This is a great workshop, and of course there's a ton of good ideas and good best practices that we should all implement. But you know, my observation as an emergency manager for many years is that the emergency management is chronically underfunded and under-resourced. So based on the experiences that you all have had, would that change your perspective, and would you tell another city that hasn't been fortunate enough not to go through that kind of thing, you know, would you suggest greater investment, less investment, different kinds of investment? What would you suggest to cities that really would like to implement all these best practices, but probably, my guess is most are under-resourced?
I think generally they are, and they are because nobody wants to think that a disaster will really happen in their community. So emergency management is something we have to do. We have to have an emergency manager, but other than that, they don't pay attention to it. So the year that I was president of the National Association of Counties, I spent a lot of time going around talking to my fellow elected officials and telling them, you need to pay attention to emergency management. and you need to pay it. You need to read your, I would ask rooms, how many people among you have read your hazard mitigation plan? I think if I was, well, this is good, but again, think of where you come from and why you're here. This would be a room of maybe 800 county commissioners across the entire state. And if I was lucky, I got about 30%. I had one individual who was a county official in a community of well over 1 million people, and he did not even know that he had a hazard mitigation plan. Very troubling. But by the end of my conversation, he was getting briefed by his staff, which is a good thing. The challenge there too, I think, one is that we absolutely need to spend more, and we need to spend more in making sure the right people are in the right places. And two, that, and I have spoken to IEM about this, emergency managers speak a language unto themselves. And it's appropriate for you. But among the people who are in elected office and who might be a school superintendent or whatever, they don't know the terminology. So trying to figure out where's the commonality of language between the people that really, because I honestly believe that if most people understood what you do in a very real way, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and use some bad language, okay? So I had someone who was an emergency manager tell me very thoughtfully, my job is to cover your, okay, CYA, this is your job is to help me. Put in that context, I told people, if you don't make your emergency manager your best friend, you're crazy. Because these are the people, when the rubber meets the road, that will know what to do. And if you aren't spending that money, it will be a secondary disaster. We got very lucky. In 2003, we opened a brand new emergency management center that was located on the community college's campus, a hardened facility. Where did it used to be? On the lower level of City Hall, which sat on an island in the middle of the river. If it had been there during the floods, it would have been a lot like what had happened in Tuscaloosa, where they got obliterated. That was a huge plus for us. So you're absolutely right on.
I would certainly concur with that statement in terms of the funding certainly concur with that. I learned my lesson on this back in 1999, probably a month before our first tornado back in 1999. My emergency manager, who still is my emergency manager, came to me, and we were in City Hall. The emergency operations center was in City Hall, windows and everything, the worst place in the world that it could be. But City Hall didn't have a generator. And my emergency manager came to me and said, we have to have a generator. It has to be. We have to have this. Well, how much is it? I think it was $50,000 or something. Back then, that was a lot of money, and I thought he was crazy. And the emergency managers, I mean, I'm thinking the sky's falling. We're not going to need this. A month later, May 3rd, 99, tornado hit more. City Hall was without power. We had the generator. We did it. City Hall was without power for several days, but we had the generator there. And if we hadn't had continuity of government, it would have been very difficult. So I learned my lesson there to listen to my emergency manager.
Excellent. Yeah. You didn't have at it.
Oh, no.
Can't deny. Would you check the mic? I'm not sure it's on the mic. The microphone, not mine.
Now it's on.
Oh, good, thank you.
I'm Jane Cage. Sorry, it's too hard to let go. And really my question is directed at Steve, and I have a vested interest, and that is, how long do you really think in your head it takes to recover from a big disaster? And have you ever gotten to be completely recovered before you had the next one? And does it get harder with everyone, or does it get easier with everyone?
Several questions there, Jane.
I know.
We had a practice run in 1998, a small tornado, 10, 15 homes. destroyed, that sort of thing. So May of '99 comes along, devastates us. 4 years later, actually the IG's office was in City Hall from the '99 storm. The week in May of 2003 that the tornado hit again in 2003. So 4 years, not a chance really to complete recovery. And then we went 10 years without anything. So we were pretty much fully recovered physically. Most of the homes rebuilt, most everything other than a loss of tree canopy. You couldn't tell that we'd had a tornado. In terms of, so the process really goes on quite a while. But in terms of whether it gets easier or harder, the mechanics of it, frankly, knowing what to do, knowing who needs to do what, frankly, the mechanics get easier. Because again, you know what to do with FEMA, you know what to expect. I know who to assign to what. I know what needs to happen. All of my people, most of my department heads have been through all of these storms with us. They know exactly what to do. The parks director knew to get the portalets out in the neighborhood so people and workers could use those things. We knew what to do there, but they get much more difficult emotionally for our community. It's much more difficult. Our people are very weather aware, but in the month of May, they're also very frightened. It's really a palpable fear that there is in our community in May. I grew up in Moore. I grew up in Oklahoma. You have severe thunderstorms in this part of the world all of April and May, some in March. They're there, but they're not the same now to our people than they were before. A nice pretty thunderstorm with some rain, we always need that. We don't look at it the same way now. And those sirens sound different now to me and to people in Moore than what they ever did before, for what they portend that could happen.
So I have two questions, and unless somebody else has a better one in between, which someone may, just I'll watch with my tap on it if I don't see it. CJ, I'm going to put you on the spot. You talked about getting the schools up quickly so that school was in session in August on time. And then you also talked about, or maybe I'm just remembering that, but what you did talk about was the longer term recovery and permanency of the schools, and that you took specific steps to do something a little different. From a leadership perspective, was there a difference in your approach to that short-term need versus the longer-term need?
Yeah, so what I'd tell you is that unlike what Linda was talking about, there was a window of opportunity in there, and we saw it. We had this grand vision for what we wanted school to look like prior to the storm, but we also knew that path was a long one to get from point A to point B. And so the sense of urgency that comes with the storm also creates an opportunity to do some things that maybe you wouldn't have done otherwise, and to take some risks. And so we took a number of risks that were the right risks to take, and we did spend that summer with all the right people at the table, really trying to create that vision of what learning was going to look like, and then spent time designing a facility around that vision, which was very unique and different. So yeah, that was a really important part of our recovery effort, and then maintaining that focus always on the kids. There wasn't a conversation that we had that we didn't have a conversation that involved the kids, and actually involved the kids in the planning and development of the construction projects themselves. They had a lot of input as well. So, getting broad-based input, doing all the same things you typically would, but just doing it on a very accelerated path, and communicating that throughout that process so everybody knew what was going on.
Okay, I heard a lot of great meat in there. I'm sure we all grabbed it. You have a question? Yes, sir.
Go ahead and ask yours.
Oh, no, I want to hear yours. Go ahead.
I'm going to add with Dante's question too. One that struck me, each of the sessions, all of our panelists have talked about the learning curve. I didn't expect this. This was different. And we know that FEMA and the states have put out a lot of classes for elected officials. We know that in a lot of cases it's underattended. there's probably more disaster response and recovery people here than there are elected officials here. So we might not have the right people attending this conference, and that's no dig on the conference organizers. I think it's a fabulous conference. But that being said, how do we train for that sprint and our marathon for our elected officials? How do we speak that language from the emergency management side? Or how do you, the elected officials, all the way to the school officials, because I'm working with my school district as well, on how to get them engaged to learn? You can't expect to know what's going to happen in that disaster. Nobody can really prepare, but they can prepare to the level that they understand that this is a marathon. This is, that you sprint and you marathon. This is not a once and done. It's not a tomorrow it's going to be better, you know, to the landfill or to your debris, you know, when's it going to be gone, right? So how do we get our elected officials to buy into this?
I would offer this, and so I would tell you that there was a summer day, and I'd been in office maybe 3 years, and then Governor, now Secretary Vilsack, was walking across the county, and he was planting a tree in every county. So it was hot, and you're walking, and I know him fairly well. I said, Tom, what was the most important lesson you learned when you got into office? And he said, I was talking to Governor Zell Miller in Georgia, and he told me to go home and learn everything I could about emergency management, because at some point in my term in office, there would be a disaster that would happen in the state, and it would be my make or break moment as an elected official. He said, I thought about it, and I took him at his word, and of course, we had disasters, and I was really glad I knew it. So one of the things I have actually used that and translated it to be to my fellow elected officials is, one, I know a lot of you and I don't think you're stupid. I've actually said that to my fellow electeds. So presuming in fact that you are not stupid, and presuming that you believe you have something to offer and you want to get reelected, do not shirk this particular duty. Because it is that moment. I mean, it's what we have talked about in so many places. It is a crucible moment. And if you aren't prepared, and if you don't have the relationships in place, you will fail. And your community will end your term in office faster than you can imagine. And there are plenty of elected officials in this country that are no longer in office because of that. And so I think that sometimes you have to speak very honestly, and it is tough because we all face budgets that, like, really, I have to buy a generator, I have to do this piece of preparedness when we all know there's not enough money to go around. But you have to put it sometimes in stark terms. Are you prepared as that elected official to go talk to the parent who will have lost a child that maybe you could have done something and you didn't in your own community? And I would tell you that another transformative moment for me was I was doing a tabletop exercise. You know, those lovely tabletop exercises that sometimes get really boring and you think about what's for lunch today? And this was a big one. And it was a bioterrorism, and there was a virus that was out, and there really wasn't a lot that could be done for it. The sheriff's deputy comes over and drops in an inject to me and says, we're asking for orders to shoot to kill. There's a mob outside of the hospital and it is about to go really bad. We'll ask questions and sort it out later. Really? And then I would honestly tell you that that was a moment when I went, holy crap, I can't believe they're asking me this. And I thought about it for a while, and I said yes. And I knew that if that situation went really bad, I probably wouldn't be in office. Well, we asked her, and she said yes, and we killed people. But I also knew that in order for them to keep order in the situation, they might need that. And that was the moment when I said, this is really serious stuff. I don't know if this will ever happen in my community, but I will never, ever again take this lightly. So, you know, again, I don't know what other elected officials face, but if you were to talk to Beth or a lot of FEMA people around here, they know I have been on this mission, preaching this for a couple of years, and I'm not gonna stop, because we don't know what the next thing will be. We're dealing with disasters, but we heard Dr. Marcus today talk about things. I find myself, I spoke at the War College about a month ago, and their conversation was, we are planning for a dirty palm EMP, and EMP is a sort of major electrical disruption where we're not gonna have electricity for 6 months. And it was like, oh, another deep breath, because these seem like total black swan events, except they can happen. So I think I would encourage you to patience and thoughtfulness and pushiness with your elected officials. Tell them that because I've got a couple of colleagues that walk down this path with me, and I'm happy to, you can take my card and say, here, I want you to go talk to this person.
Great, thank you, Lynn. And in my role as moderator, I apologize, but I'm gonna have to end the questions there. Please, I want Kim, though, to have final word, because she had something she wanted to say in response.
Yeah, in response to the emergency management question, I don't know if it's easier because we're a smaller town, but 2/3 of my, well, 2 of my 5 board members are also fire department members. We're a volunteer fire department. I'm also a firefighter EMT. I expect and make them all, the firefighters and the board member and the planning commission, they all take NIMS training. And I don't let them go to the computer and kind of have, you know what, do it. I teach it to them. And I make sure that they are aware of what goes on, and that helped us a lot too.
Great. So to wrap up, if I could, and I'm going to speak for these folks and tell you that you can come and ask them any questions after the session that you'd like to ask, and they'll be happy to answer. Okay, nobody threw anything. I think we've heard about the realities of challenges that are faced by leaders. Dr. Marcus talked about asking ourselves the question, why do I lead? And I think another step would be to say, how will I lead? Not just in terms of style, but in terms of process and engagement and priorities, and that we start that how will I lead in a crisis before the crisis ever occurs. Because the truth is that the best leadership in a crisis is leadership that has begun before the crisis ever occurred. That leadership, that need for leadership does not end after response, after search and rescue is over. And in fact, that need for leadership may actually increase into the longer term recovery phases, because people are certainly a lot self-directed during response. And lastly, that recognition of impacts of the disaster on us as individuals, on the people that work with and for us, the people with whom we engage in the response and the long-term recovery process, and certainly all of the decision-making that is wrapped up around that. If we as leaders can view our role in terms of being visionaries and the long haul and the influence and knowing when to make those short-term, the building's on fire, get out, don't want to talk about it, versus the longer term, who's being impacted by these decisions, and engaging those stakeholders in that long-term leadership, including the kids in the rebuilding of their schools. A lot of difference in how we lead in that long term. Thank you all for participating. Thank you all for sharing.